Dear friends, we're working hard to share these with you. Please subscribe and like our work. Thank you in advance. If you're ready, let's begin our story. The power fluctuations in Sublevel 7 had been bugging Frank Morrison for 3 weeks, just irregular enough to show up on his diagnostic scans but too subtle for the automated systems to trace. At 67, he'd been maintaining New Haven Station's life support systems long enough to know that mysterious power drains usually meant someone was tapping into the grid illegally, either black market operations or squatters who couldn't afford legitimate housing. Frank made his way through the rarely used maintenance corridors with the steady gait of someone who'd walked these passages for 4 decades. The lower levels of the station housed the primary atmospheric processors, water recycling plants, and backup power systems that kept 40,000 residents breathing, but they also contained dozens of abandoned sections that had been sealed off when budget cuts reduced the station's operational capacity. His diagnostic scanner led him deeper into the forgotten areas, past corridors that hadn't seen official maintenance in years. The power drain was definitely down here, somewhere in section C7, but the readings didn't match any known equipment signatures. Frank paused at a junction of 3 passages, consulting his scanner and noting that the unauthorized draw seemed strongest toward the old secondary processing plant. That's when he heard it, a soft sound that definitely wasn't mechanical. A whimper, quickly suppressed, coming from behind a maintenance panel that should have led to empty equipment bays. Frank had discovered squatters before, usually desperate families who couldn't afford legitimate station housing. Standard procedure was to report them to security, but Frank had developed a reputation for finding creative interpretations of standard procedure when it came to people who just needed a place to survive. He approached the maintenance panel carefully, not wanting to frighten whoever was hiding back there. "Hello," he called softly. "I'm maintenance staff. I'm not here to cause trouble, just checking on some power issues." Silence. Then the soft sound of movement, someone trying to retreat deeper into whatever space they'd claimed as shelter. Frank consulted his scanner again, noting that the power drain included heat generation and what looked like jury-rigged lighting. Someone had been living here for a while, long enough to create a semi-permanent setup. "Look," he said to the maintenance panel, "I know you're back there, and I know you're using station power. That's fine by me, but if security finds you, they'll haul you off to detention. I'd rather help you figure out a safer way to do this." More silence, but Frank had patience. 40 years of coaxing life support systems through impossible repairs had taught him that the right approach took time. Finally, a voice answered. Young, female, and carrying an accent that marked it as definitely not human. "Please go away. I am not supposed to be here." Frank felt his protective instincts stir. The voice sounded scared and sick, with the kind of exhausted desperation that came from living too long on the edge of survival. "Nobody's supposed to be in the maintenance areas without authorization, but here we both are. Why don't you tell me what you need?" "I need to not be found." The voice was clearer now, coming from an access hatch about 10 feet down the corridor. "Please, old human, just pretend you did not see the power readings." "Can't do that," Frank replied, settling down on his maintenance stool with the deliberate care of someone whose knees weren't what they used to be. "Power drains get investigated until they're resolved. But maybe we can resolve this in a way that works for everyone." He heard movement behind the hatch, and then it cracked open just enough for him to see part of a face. The features were mostly human, but the ears were distinctly pointed, marking his unexpected neighbor as one of the Xanathi refugees who'd been arriving at the station in small numbers over the past year. "You're Xanathi," Frank observed. "Running from the collective?" The hatch opened a bit wider, revealing a young woman who looked to be in her early 20s, with the pale complexion that came from living without proper nutrition or sunlight. "You know of the collective's policies? I know they have some pretty specific ideas about genetic perfection, and I know that people who don't fit their specifications sometimes end up looking for new places to live." Frank kept his voice gentle and non-threatening. "I also know that most of those people aren't hiding in maintenance tunnels. They go through proper asylum procedures. Asylum procedures do not accept the genetically insufficient, she replied bitterly. Neither human nor Xanathi authorities wish to take responsibility for defective citizens. Frank studied what he could see of her face through the partially open hatch. She looked exhausted and malnourished, but also intelligent and alert. Defective how? Instead of answering, she opened the hatch wider and awkwardly pulled herself into view. Frank immediately understood why she'd been rejected by the asylum system. Her legs were clearly partially paralyzed, leaving her dependent on her arms to move through the narrow maintenance spaces. Genetic degradation of neural pathways affecting motor control, she said with clinical detachment. Progressive condition that will eventually result in complete paralysis. The collective classified me as biologically insufficient and scheduled me for reclamation. Frank had heard enough about Xanathi reclamation to know it wasn't something anyone survived intact. So you ran. I ran. For 6 months I have been living in the forgotten spaces of stations and settlements, surviving on discarded resources and avoiding detection. She pulled herself further out of the hatch, revealing makeshift modifications to her clothing that allowed her to move more easily through tight spaces. But my condition worsens, and my ability to remain hidden diminishes. Frank looked at her jury-rigged living situation, a small space behind the maintenance panel that she'd equipped with scavenged bedding, basic lighting powered by an illegal tap into the station's grid, and a collection of salvaged food containers. It was impressive in its ingenuity, but obviously inadequate for long-term survival. "What's your name?" he asked. I was Lyssa of the 7th Synthesis. Now I am no one. Well, Lyssa of the 7th Synthesis, Frank said, standing up and gathering his tools, I'm Frank Morrison, and I've been keeping this station running since before you were born. And I think we can do better than having you live in an equipment bay. Lyssa looked at him with wariness mixed with desperate hope. You would help me? Even though I am defective and unauthorized? Honey, I've been fixing broken things my whole life. The only difference between you and a malfunctioning atmospheric processor is that you can tell me what you need instead of making me guess from diagnostic readings. For the first time since he'd found her, Lyssa smiled. It was a small expression, quickly suppressed, but it transformed her face from desperate to merely tired. What do you need? Frank asked. A place to exist without being found. Access to basic resources. Perhaps, medical care, though I know that is impossible. Frank consulted his scanner, then looked around at the abandoned maintenance areas with the practiced eye of someone who saw potential rather than problems. Lyssa, what do you know about atmospheric processing systems? Basic principles only. Why? Because I think I have an idea that might solve several problems at once. Frank began walking toward the deeper maintenance sections, moving slowly enough for Lyssa to follow at her own pace. These old processing areas need monitoring, but they're too far from central control for regular automated oversight. If someone were to, say, set up a monitoring station down here and make sure the backup system stayed operational, that would actually be valuable work. You are suggesting I become an unofficial maintenance worker? I'm suggesting you become an official consultant on atmospheric systems monitoring. Paid position, legitimate access to station resources, and a damn good reason to be in areas where most people don't go. Lyssa stopped moving, staring at him with disbelief. That is impossible. I am genetically defective, legally non-existent, and physically incapable of standard work duties. Frank turned back to face her, his expression carrying the kind of patient certainty that came from 40 years of solving impossible problems. Lyssa, the atmospheric processors don't care about your genetics, the station computer doesn't know you're legally non-existent, and monitoring systems work just fine when operated by someone sitting down. But the authorities. We'll see an atmospheric systems consultant who keeps the backup processors running smoothly and saves the station about 50,000 credits a year in automated monitoring costs. Frank's smile held the satisfaction of a good solution falling into place. Sometimes the best way to hide is in plain sight, doing work that people are grateful to have done. Lyssa considered this for a long moment. You would risk your position to help someone you have just met. Honey, I'm 67 years old, and I've already lived longer than anyone expected when I started this job. At this point, I'm more interested in using whatever time I have left to do things that matter. And I matter. Frank looked at her, a young woman who'd been discarded by her own people, rejected by the authorities, and forced to survive on scraps in forgotten corners of civilization, and felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't experienced since his wife died 3 years ago. Everyone matters, Lyssa. The trick is finding the right tools to let them prove it. 3 weeks later, the forgotten sections of Sublevel 7 had been transformed into something that looked almost like a legitimate monitoring station. Frank had worked with Lyssa to install proper lighting, ventilation, and communication systems, all documented as atmospheric systems upgrade in his maintenance reports. The abandoned equipment bays now housed a surprisingly sophisticated monitoring setup that tracked air quality, temperature, and pressure throughout the station's backup life support systems. "Hand me that pressure sensor," Frank called from inside an access panel, his voice muffled by the cramped workspace. Lyssa maneuvered her improvised mobility chair to the equipment rack, her movements now smooth and efficient after weeks of practice with Frank's jury-rigged solutions. The chair itself was a masterpiece of practical engineering, built from spare maintenance cart wheels, recycled station seating, and control interfaces positioned exactly where she could reach them. It looked like nothing special, but it allowed her to move through the monitoring station with speed and precision. "Pressure sensor, Type 7, calibration current," she confirmed, handing him the device. "Frank, the atmospheric composition readings for Section C-12 show irregularities in oxygen concentration. Probably a clogged filter in the secondary intake," Frank replied, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a problem with a straightforward solution. "We'll add it to tomorrow's maintenance schedule." Lyssa made notes on her work pad, her efficiency with the monitoring systems now rivaling any trained technician. Frank had been amazed to discover that her Xanathi education, combined with natural mechanical aptitude, made her exceptionally good at systems analysis. What she lacked in mobility, she more than compensated for with attention to detail and intuitive understanding of how complex systems should behave. "Frank," she said carefully, "I have been thinking about the power distribution efficiency problems in the upper residential areas." "What kind of thinking?" "The load balancing algorithms appear to be optimized for equipment that was replaced during the last major upgrade cycle. The current systems operate more efficiently at different parameters, but the control software still uses the old optimization curves." Frank emerged from the access panel, wiping his hands on a maintenance rag. In the weeks they'd been working together, he'd learned that when Lyssa started talking about system optimization, she usually had ideas that would make his job significantly easier. "Show me what you're thinking." Lyssa pulled up system schematics on her workstation, highlighting the power distribution networks with the kind of visual analysis that Frank had never seen from station engineers half his age. "If we modified the load balancing parameters here, and here," she said, pointing to specific nodes, "we could improve efficiency by approximately 12% while reducing wear on the primary distribution systems." Frank studied her analysis, cross-referencing it with his own experience of which systems tended to break down most frequently. "Lyssa, this is brilliant. These modifications would solve half the chronic power issues we've been dealing with. It is simply a matter of matching system parameters to actual rather than theoretical operating conditions," she replied, but Frank could see the pleasure his praise gave her. After months of being told she was defective and worthless, recognition of her capabilities seemed to surprise her every time. "Have you considered that you might be better at this than most of the engineers I work with?" Frank asked. Lyssa was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on her workpad screen. "On my world, genetic insufficiency is assumed to indicate cognitive as well as physical defects. I was never permitted to pursue technical education beyond basic maintenance functions. Well, their loss is our gain." Frank began gathering the tools needed to implement her suggested modifications. "Though I have to say, for someone with basic maintenance functions, you sure have a lot of opinions about atmospheric processing efficiency." Lyssa's laugh was still tentative, but it came more easily now than when he'd first found her. Perhaps I have learned from an excellent teacher. Teacher, hell. You figured out that pressure sensor calibration problem faster than I would have. Frank paused in his tool gathering. Lyssa, how much of your technical knowledge comes from formal education, and how much from just figuring things out? Most of it is intuitive analysis, she admitted. I observe how systems behave, identify inefficiencies, and extrapolate better solutions. But this is not considered valuable on my world, where approved solutions are predetermined by genetic optimization algorithms. Frank stared at her. You're telling me that your people have computers design their engineering solutions instead of letting engineers solve problems? Genetic optimization ensures that solutions meet predetermined efficiency standards without risk of variation that might introduce systemic flaws. And what happens to people who see better ways to do things? Lyssa's expression darkened. People who suggest modifications to approved solutions are classified as exhibiting dangerous deviation from optimal thinking. This is considered a symptom of genetic insufficiency requiring correction. Frank felt anger building in his chest, not at Lyssa, but at a system that would waste someone with her obvious talents. So they were going to correct you for being too good at engineering? They were going to correct me for being crippled, Lyssa said matter-of-factly. The engineering insights were simply additional evidence of cognitive deviation from approved patterns. Cognitive deviation, Frank repeated. You mean thinking for yourself? Essentially, yes. Frank looked around their improvised monitoring station, noting all the efficiency improvements Lyssa had suggested and the innovative solutions she'd developed for her own mobility needs. Lyssa, on my world, we have a word for people who see better ways to do things and figure out solutions that nobody else thought of. What word? Genius. Lyssa went very still. That is not how my people would classify me. Your people, Frank said with growing conviction, are idiots who throw away their most valuable assets because they don't fit predetermined specifications. The monitoring station's communication system chimed with an incoming message from station administration. Frank checked the display, noting that it was a routine efficiency report request, the kind of paperwork that usually took him hours to compile and always showed disappointing performance metrics for the backup systems. Frank, Lyssa said quietly, before you answer that request, may I show you something? She pulled up a comprehensive analysis of station atmospheric systems, complete with efficiency ratings, maintenance predictions, and cost-benefit projections. The report was more detailed and accurate than anything Frank had ever submitted, clearly demonstrating that the backup systems were now operating at peak efficiency for the first time in years. When did you prepare this? Frank asked in amazement. I have been compiling performance data since we began working together. I thought perhaps it might be useful to demonstrate the value of our monitoring program. Frank reviewed the report, noting that it showed not only improved performance but also significant cost savings from preventive maintenance and optimized resource allocation. Lyssa, this report is going to make station administration very happy. They love seeing numbers that show improved efficiency and reduced costs. Does this mean our monitoring station will be considered successful? Honey, this report is going to make them want to expand the program. Frank began uploading Lyssa's analysis to the administration system. Which raises an interesting question about your official status. Lyssa's expression grew cautious. What kind of question? The kind where station administration is going to want to meet the consultant who's been producing such excellent work, and we need to figure out how to make that meeting go well for everyone involved. Frank, I am still legally non-existent and technically unauthorized to be here. You're also the person responsible for the best atmospheric systems performance this station has seen in a decade, Frank replied. Sometimes practical results carry more weight than paperwork complications. And if they decide that regulations are more important than results? Frank looked at her, this young woman who'd survived rejection, exile, and months of hiding, who'd taken his basic kindness and transformed it into a partnership that made both their lives better. Then we'll figure out a way to make the regulations work for us instead of against us, he said. Lyssa, I've been fixing impossible things for 40 years. I'm not about to let bureaucracy be the first problem I can't solve. The crisis began when Lyssa collapsed during what should have been a routine maintenance procedure. Frank found her unconscious in her monitoring chair, her breathing shallow and her skin carrying the grayish pallor that indicated her degenerative condition was accelerating beyond anything her jury-rigged medical monitoring could track. The improvised care that had sustained her for months was no longer sufficient, and they both knew it. "Frank," she whispered when she regained consciousness, "I think my time in hiding is ending." Frank checked her vital signs with the basic medical scanner he'd installed in their monitoring station, noting readings that would have sent any legitimate patient straight to the medical bay. "Your neurological deterioration is progressing faster than we expected. The stress of concealing my condition while maintaining work performance has likely accelerated the cellular breakdown," Lyssa said with clinical detachment. "I estimate perhaps 2 weeks before motor control becomes insufficient for even basic tasks." Frank stared at the medical readings, his engineering mind automatically searching for solutions to what was fundamentally a biological problem beyond his expertise. "We need to get you proper medical attention." "Frank, you know that is impossible. Medical treatment requires identification verification, legal status confirmation, and species-specific protocols that would immediately expose my presence to authorities." "Then we make it possible," Frank said with the stubborn determination that had kept him solving impossible problems for 4 decades. "There has to be a way to get you the care you need without throwing you to the bureaucratic wolves." Before Lyssa could respond, their monitoring station's proximity alarms activated, indicating someone approaching through the maintenance corridors. Frank quickly helped Lyssa back to her hidden quarters while he prepared to deal with what was probably a routine inspection, the kind of administrative oversight that had become more frequent as their monitoring program's success drew official attention. But the visitor who emerged from the access corridor wasn't a station administrator. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, New Haven Station's chief medical officer, stepped into the monitoring station with the kind of focused urgency that suggested she wasn't here for a social call. "Mr. Morrison," she said without preamble, "I've been reviewing the medical supply usage patterns for Sublevel 7, and I need to ask you some questions." Frank felt his stomach drop. Medical supplies? Neurological monitoring equipment, pain management medications, and specialized nutritional supplements have been requisitioned for atmospheric systems maintenance over the past 3 weeks. Dr. Rodriguez consulted her data pad. "Either you're treating life support systems for conditions typically associated with degenerative neurological disorders, or someone down here needs medical attention." Frank looked at Dr. Rodriguez, a woman he'd known professionally for 15 years, someone whose reputation for putting patient care above administrative convenience was well established throughout the station. "Elena," he said carefully, "if someone did need medical attention, and if that someone couldn't go through normal channels for legal reasons, what would you do?" "I'd provide the medical attention," she replied immediately. "My oath is to help patients, not to interrogate them about their documentation status." She paused, studying Frank's expression. "Frank, is there someone here who needs help?" From her hidden quarters, Lyssa's voice carried through the thin partition. "Frank, there is no point in continuing to conceal the situation. Dar. Rodriguez has clearly identified my presence through medical supply analysis." Dr. Rodriguez looked toward the sound of the voice with professional interest rather than alarm. "May I meet your patient, Frank?" Frank helped Lyssa emerge from her concealment, watching Dr. Rodriguez's face as she took in the young woman's obvious alien heritage and equally obvious medical distress. There was no surprise, no judgment, just the focused attention of a physician assessing a patient who needed care. "I'm Dr. Rodriguez," she said, kneeling beside Lyssa's mobility chair. "Can you tell me about your symptoms?" "Progressive motor neuron degradation affecting lower extremity function," Lyssa replied with medical precision. "Genetic condition specific to my species, classified as terminal with no approved treatment protocols." "No approved treatment protocols according to whom?" "The Xanathi Collective Medical Authority. Individuals with my condition are classified as genetically insufficient and scheduled for reclamation rather than treatment." Dr. Rodriguez's expression hardened. Reclamation. Forced genetic modification that typically results in complete cognitive restructuring or death, Lyssa said matter-of-factly. Neither outcome preserves the individual's identity or consciousness. I see. Dr. Rodriguez pulled out her medical scanner, running comprehensive diagnostics with the kind of thorough professionalism that Frank had always admired. And you've been surviving down here with Frank's help rather than submitting to this reclamation? I have been attempting to extend my functional existence while contributing useful work to justify the resources I consume, Lyssa confirmed. Dr. Rodriguez completed her scanning, reviewing the results with growing interest. Lyssa, your condition is serious, but it's not untreatable. Human neurological medicine has developed therapies for similar degenerative processes that could significantly slow or even halt the progression. Such treatments would require legal status, medical authorization, and official acknowledgement of my presence, Lyssa pointed out. All of which would result in my deportation and subsequent reclamation. Not necessarily. Dr. Rodriguez began making notes on her data pad. Frank, how long has Lyssa been working on the atmospheric systems monitoring project? About 6 weeks. Why? Because 6 weeks of employment in critical infrastructure maintenance establishes her as a valuable station asset. And treating a valuable station asset who becomes ill while performing essential duties falls under emergency medical protocols that supersede immigration status questions. Frank stared at her. You're saying you can treat her officially? I'm saying that if the station's atmospheric systems consultant becomes ill, I'm obligated to provide whatever medical care is necessary to restore her to functional status. Dr. Rodriguez smiled. It would be negligent of me to allow critical infrastructure maintenance to suffer due to preventable medical complications. Lyssa looked between Frank and Dr. Rodriguez with the kind of cautious hope that suggested she was afraid to believe what she was hearing. You would classify my medical treatment as critical infrastructure maintenance? Honey, Frank said, you've improved our atmospheric system's efficiency by 12% and prevented at least 3 major equipment failures. If that's not critical infrastructure maintenance, I don't know what is. Over the next several hours, Dr. Rodriguez conducted the most thorough medical evaluation Lyssa had ever received, using advanced human neurological medicine to map the progression of her condition and develop treatment protocols that combined human therapeutic techniques with Xanathi physiology. What she discovered surprised everyone involved. Lyssa, Dr. Rodriguez said, reviewing her comprehensive analysis, your condition isn't actually terminal. It's progressive, but it responds well to targeted neurological therapy combined with specific physical rehabilitation. The collective medical authority classified it as genetic insufficiency requiring correction, Lyssa protested. The collective medical authority was wrong, Dr. Rodriguez replied bluntly. What they saw as genetic insufficiency, human medicine recognizes as a treatable neurological condition. With proper therapy, you should be able to halt the progression and possibly restore some lost function. Frank felt relief flooding through him like a tide. You mean she's going to be okay? I mean she's going to need ongoing treatment, regular therapy, and probably some equipment modifications to optimize her mobility, but yes, she's going to be fine. Dr. Rodriguez began preparing treatment protocols. Though this does raise some interesting questions about station policy regarding individuals whose home governments have classified them as expendable. What kind of questions? Frank asked. The kind that might result in New Haven Station becoming the first human settlement to offer formal asylum to individuals rejected by their own species for genetic or physical differences. Dr. Rodriguez's smile held the satisfaction of someone who'd found a way to make the system work for the people it was supposed to serve. Especially if those individuals happen to be exceptionally talented at maintaining critical infrastructure. Lyssa stared at them both. You are suggesting that I could remain here legally? With official recognition and medical support? I'm suggesting, Frank said, that sometimes the best solutions come from people who care more about fixing problems than following procedures. And Elena here is very good at finding procedures that let her fix the problems she wants to fix. Frank Morrison, Dr. Rodriguez said with mock severity, are you suggesting that I would manipulate medical and administrative protocols to circumvent immigration regulations? I'm suggesting that you're about to provide essential medical care to a critical infrastructure consultant who happens to be one of the most talented engineers I've ever worked with, Frank replied. Everything else is just paperwork. As Dr. Rodriguez began Lyssa's first official medical treatment in years, Frank reflected on how much their hidden monitoring station had become home for all of them. What had started as a simple act of compassion had evolved into something that benefited everyone involved. Lyssa had found purpose and care, Frank had found renewed meaning in his work, and Dr. Rodriguez had found a way to use her skills to help someone who truly needed it. Sometimes, Frank thought, the best engineering wasn't about building perfect systems, but about finding ways to make imperfect systems work for everyone who needed them. The diplomatic crisis arrived exactly 3 days after Dr. Rodriguez had filed Lyssa's medical treatment under critical infrastructure maintenance protocols. 2 Xanathi enforcement ships docked at New Haven Station with formal extradition demands, claiming jurisdiction over a genetically deficient citizen who has unlawfully evaded reclamation processing. The legal framework was clear, interspecies treaties required the return of fugitive nationals, and Lyssa's asylum claim had no official standing under existing diplomatic agreements. Frank found himself in Station Administrator Chen's office, facing a room full of lawyers, diplomats, and officials who were all very concerned about the precedent they might set by protecting someone whose own government considered her disposable. Mr. Morrison, Administrator Chen said, while we appreciate the excellent work your consultant has performed, we cannot ignore formal extradition demands from a treaty partner. Ms. Lyssa must be returned to Xanathi custody for proper processing according to their legal procedures. Their legal procedures involve forced genetic modification that will destroy her mind, Frank replied bluntly. We're not talking about a criminal trial here, we're talking about medical murder. Nevertheless, she is a Xanathi citizen, and we have no legal authority to interfere with their internal policies regarding genetic health management. Dr. Rodriguez, who had insisted on attending the meeting as Lyssa's treating physician, leaned forward with the kind of professional intensity that made administrators nervous. Actually, we do have that authority. Explain. Medical asylum protocols supersede extradition requirements when returning a patient would result in immediate and substantial harm to their health. Dr. Rodriguez pulled out her comprehensive medical analysis. Ms. Lyssa's treatment is ongoing and medically necessary. Interrupting her therapy to return her to procedures that would cause neurological damage constitutes a violation of medical ethics that I cannot support. The Xanathi diplomatic representative, a tall alien with the perfectly symmetrical features that marked him as genetically optimized, spoke with the kind of cold authority that brooked no argument. Dr. Rodriguez, the individual you refer to as a patient is a genetically deficient citizen who has unlawfully evaded corrective procedures designed to optimize her biological function. Her condition represents a contamination risk to genetic integrity that requires immediate remediation. Her condition, Frank said, standing up with the slow deliberation of someone who'd finally reached his limit, is that she's one of the most brilliant engineers I've ever worked with, and your people were too stupid to recognize talent when it was right in front of them. Mr. Morrison, Administrator Chen warned, please remember that we're in delicate diplomatic negotiations. No, we're not, Frank replied. We're in a room full of people trying to find fancy words for throwing a sick girl back to people who want to destroy her brain because she doesn't meet their manufacturing specifications. Before anyone could respond, Lyssa entered the room in her mobility chair, moving with the confident precision that had become her trademark over months of working with Frank. Dr. Rodriguez started to object to her presence at such a stressful meeting, but Lyssa held up a hand to forestall medical concern. I appreciate everyone's attention to my situation, she said with calm dignity, but I believe this discussion would benefit from my direct participation. The Xanathi representative studied her with visible distaste. Citizen Lyssa, you will return to the enforcement vessels for immediate transport to the nearest reclamation facility. Your unlawful evasion of genetic correction has been noted and will be addressed during processing. I formally refuse, Lyssa replied calmly. Refusal is not an option. You are genetically deficient and therefore lack the cognitive capacity to make decisions regarding your biological optimization. Actually, Lyssa said, I believe my cognitive capacity is exactly what we should be discussing. She activated her work pad, displaying the comprehensive station efficiency analysis she'd been preparing. This presentation demonstrates the improvements to New Haven Station's atmospheric systems achieved through my work with Mr. Morrison. What followed was the most technically sophisticated presentation Frank had ever witnessed. Lyssa systematically demonstrated how her modifications had improved station performance, reduced costs, and prevented equipment failures that could have endangered thousands of lives. Her analysis was thorough, innovative, and delivered with the kind of professional competence that left everyone in the room reassessing their assumptions. These efficiency improvements, she concluded, represent engineering solutions that your genetic optimization algorithms failed to generate. If I am cognitively deficient, then your perfect genetic specimens are producing inferior results compared to defective thinking. The Xanathi representative looked genuinely disturbed by this information. These modifications were not approved by proper genetic optimization protocols. No, Lyssa agreed. They were developed through individual analysis, creative problem-solving, and collaborative engineering, all cognitive processes that your reclamation procedures are designed to eliminate. Administrator Chen studied the performance data with growing amazement. MS. Lyssa, this shows that your work has saved the station approximately 200,000 credits in maintenance costs while improving life support reliability by 15%. Correct. And this represents only preliminary optimization based on limited access to station systems. With proper authorization and resources, these efficiency improvements could be expanded significantly. Frank watched the faces around the conference table as they processed what Lyssa was demonstrating. She wasn't just asking for asylum, she was proving that the very traits her people considered genetic deficiency were actually valuable capabilities that produced superior results. Dr. Rodriguez stood up with the satisfaction of someone whose medical instincts had been vindicated. Administrator Chen, I formally recommend that Ms. Lyssa be granted permanent asylum status based on her demonstrated value to station operations and the medical necessity of continued treatment. That recommendation exceeds medical authority, the Xanathi representative protested. No, said a new voice from the conference room doorway. Commander Sarah Kim, New Haven Station security chief, entered with a data pad full of recent communications. It doesn't. She addressed Administrator Chen directly. Sir, I've just received formal notification from Earth's Interspecies Affairs Office that they're implementing new asylum protocols for individuals whose home governments classify them as genetically insufficient. Ms. Lyssa's case is being designated as the pilot program for these expanded protections. The Xanathi representative looked alarmed. This represents unprecedented interference in collective internal policies. This represents human civilization recognizing that genetic diversity and individual capability matter more than theoretical perfection, Commander Kim replied. Earth has officially classified genetic reclamation procedures as a form of persecution that justifies asylum protection. Frank felt something he hadn't experienced in months, pure relief mixed with genuine pride. You mean she gets to stay? She gets to stay, keep working, receive continued medical care, and serve as the foundation for expanded asylum protections for other individuals rejected by their home species. Administrator Chen signed the asylum documentation with visible satisfaction. Ms. Lyssa, welcome to your new life as a permanent resident of New Haven Station. The Xanathi representative made one final attempt. This decision will have significant diplomatic consequences. Yes, Lyssa said calmly, it will demonstrate that human civilization values individual capability over genetic conformity, and that practical results matter more than theoretical optimization. She paused, looking directly at the representative. It will also demonstrate that individuals you classify as defective can produce superior work when given proper support and opportunity. 6 months later, Frank found himself in a larger workshop in the station's main engineering section, surrounded by assistants from 3 different species who were all learning what he'd come to call practical engineering, the art of making systems work for everyone who needed to use them, regardless of their individual specifications. Lyssa, now officially the station's chief systems optimization specialist, had developed innovations that were being implemented throughout human space. Her mobility aids had evolved into sophisticated assistive technologies that enhanced rather than limited her capabilities, and her engineering solutions had set new standards for efficiency and adaptability. "Frank," she said one afternoon as they worked together on a new project, "I have been thinking about something." "What's that?" "When you first found me, you said that everyone matters, and the trick is finding the right tools to let them prove it." "I remember. I think perhaps the most important tool is simply someone who believes that everyone deserves the chance to prove their worth." Lyssa smiled, the expression now natural and frequent. "Thank you for being willing to see value where others saw only deficiency." Frank looked around their workshop, watching engineers from multiple species collaborate on solutions that served everyone's needs. "Honey, the value was always there. I just helped you find better tools to show it off. And now we are teaching others to find those tools as well. Now we're proving that good engineering serves everyone, not just the theoretically perfect." Frank returned to his work, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from problems solved and people helped. "Though I have to say, for someone who was supposedly cognitively deficient, you sure have a lot of good ideas about how to make things work better." Lyssa's laughter filled their workshop, a sound that had become as familiar and welcome as the hum of perfectly calibrated machinery. "Perhaps," she said, "deficiency is simply excellence that hasn't found the right application yet." Frank couldn't argue with that logic. After all, some of the best engineering he'd ever seen had come from finding new ways to make broken things work perfectly.